Hello friends, Assalamu alaikum and welcome. Myself Sheikh Kamruzzaman and you are watching weekly lecture series number 5 on culture and personality. It is organized by Department of Sociology, Birpara College, Alipurduar and Education and Cultural Station, ECS, Belur. Today, here with us Dr. Sourav Madhur Dey, Head of the Department Sociology, Burdwan University, and his today's topic is culture, stress, and well-being on appraisal. Welcome to Dr. Sourav Madhur Dey.
Thank you.
Before going to him, I have a short description about our program and Dr. Sourav Madhur Dey. Our first program on culture and personality was started on 11th October 2020. And our first guest was Professor Sheikh Mokbul Islam from St. Paul College. And now today Dr. Sourav Madhur Dey will present his uh, valuable presentations in front to us. Dr. Sourav Madhur Dey has completed his post-graduation degree from Kollani University and secured first position in master. He did his PhD from Jadavpur University and he is the first PhD holder in the history of Department of Sociology, Jadavpur University. His research topic was health hazards and care of cancer patients. Currently, he is a assistant professor of Department of Sociology at the University of Burdwan, and now he is holding the head of the department position. In Burdwan University, he started medical sociology as an elective paper in masters, first of its kinds of West Bengal. He is also engaged in teaching in the postgraduate diploma course in guidance and counseling in collaboration with Department of Lifelong Learning, Burdwan University, and has been instrumental in shaping the structure and the content of course. He is also engaged with women's studies uh, department there. He has presented paper in numerous national and international conferences, the most prominent being his participation in University of Manchester, England in September 2009. He has numerous publications in national and international journals and edited books, and he has over 40 publications to his credit. Under his guidance, many students are doing their PhD in 2019. Uh, he is or has been associated with almost all universities of West Bengal in different capacities. His area of specializations including sociology of medicine, sociology of gender, and demography. Today, he is going to deliver his lecture on the topic culture, stress, and well-being and appraisal. Okay, so now I over to Dr. Sourav Madhur Dey to deliver his lecture. Sir, Dr. Sourav Madhur Dey.
Thank you, Professor Kamruzzaman, for giving me the space to speak on this topic. A very good morning to all the respected and distinguished academicians of Department of Sociology, Birpara College, in association with Educational and Cultural Station of Ramakrishna Mission, Vidya Mandir, Belur, for organizing lecture series under the umbrella theme Culture and Personality, which is really a very pertinent and relevant topic, as culture and personality are interdependent and track along an interconnected curve. Because on one hand, there is a cultural as you all know, that there is a cultural determinism theory, uh, which says that culture influences socialization patterns, which in turn shapes some of the variants of personality. Why I'm saying that some of the variants of personality? Because culture has a profound impact in shaping our personality. That's true, but it cannot be said with any certainty that the persons or the people or the individuals who are under the effect of a particular culture all will be shaped in a uniform way. It is not possible, because our personality type is a result of not only of the socialization process only. It's something which is connected with our biopsychosocial makeup. So that is why I'm saying that culture influences socialization patterns and hence our personality, but it shapes some aspects of the variance of personality, not everything, because two people from the same culture are not the same. So there must be some individual differences, and there should be some individual differences between people living within a particular culture also. So culture greatly contributes to the development of our beliefs and values. That is most important. For this reason, both cultural psychologists and social anthropologists believe that culture, to a considerable extent, affects one's personality to a considerable extent. It is very important to spell out this in clear terms. So there is some unifying thread or commonality inherent in culture. It can be said with any certainty, because without the commonality or the unifying thread in it, intersubjective perceptions will not appear. Because within a particular culture, when there is subjectivity means, or intersubjective perceptions refer to the shared perceptions of psychological characteristics that are widespread within a particular culture. So there must be some commonality or unifying thread inherent in a particular culture. Uh, but on the other hand, there is also another school of thought by Gardiner and Linton, who believe that cultural types are not adequate for differentiating societies. Instead, they offered a rather new approach, a novel approach, which looks at individual members first within a society, and then compares the traits of these members to achieve a basic personality for each culture. Therefore, they are taking off from individual, then going to the structure. Unlike the previous one, who are taking off from the structure and then moving to the individual. Therefore, the causal primacy between the structure and the agency will always be there. The debate but pertaining to the primacy of structure as well as agency will always be there in the sociological discourse, or will always be there within any cultural discourse particularly. Because structures are always constituted by individuals thinking, acting, and interacting in a specific ways. So we literally cannot separate agents and structures. They are mutually constitutive, or rather, we can say in a particular technical term that agency and structure over determinism, because no one can say with any certainty which whether agency or culture, or rather whether agency or structure has a causal edge over another aspect. So they are interrelated with each other in a mutually constitutive or in a mutually over deterministic way. So that is why I'm saying the agency structure over determinism. So it's just a prologue regarding the umbrella theme of the current lecture series. Now, my today's deliberation will be on culture, stress, and well-being and appraisal. And I especially thank Professor Sheikh Kamaruzzaman, Department of Sociology, Burdwan, and ECS for giving me the Educational and Cultural Station of Ramakrishna Mission Vidya Mandir, Belur, for giving me the space to talk with you regarding this topic. And I would like to make this deliberation in English specifically, basically for the sake of the larger audience. And in specific references, I would rather shift to Bengali as and when required. Now, when I'm going to talk on stress and its relation with culture, I mean, quote unquote, social stress, or the stress that stems from one's relationships with others or from the social and cultural environment in general. Now, this operationalization of concept is very important as it will enable us to determine the boundary or delimit our focus, because when we are talking of any particular topic like stress, which has a multidisciplinary, what should I say, multidisciplinary tendency, there is always a threat or there is always a peril of the spillover, because whenever we are talking of stress, there is always a tendency to spill over the concept to the concept of psychology, because psychology, sociology, social work, these disciplines uh, are to a large extent overlapping while talking of stress, because medical sociology also talks of stress. The guidance and counseling course that Kamaruzzaman has just introduced in his has just talked about in his introductory speech is also connected with this stress, with this stress thing. So the main point of my argument is that since a topic like a stress is something which has a multi-disciplinary orientation, so there is always a threat of spilling out the concept from the domain of sociology to domain of psychology and other disciplines. So in order to delimit our focus, or in order to determine the boundary of the focus of today's discussion within the I would not say the constraints of sociology, rather I'd say within the periphery of sociology. So this operationalization of concept is very important. That's why I've used the term social stress rather than only stress. Now, the very pertinent question, being a student of sociology, we might ask that what is so social about stress? Why we are calling it a social stress? Uh, what is so social about it? So let me start with the claim that the connotation of social be extracted out from its conventional and confining usage, particularly in social science discourse, as any relationship between two or more individuals, or for that matter, human society and its member living together in communities or organized groups. So in conventional social science discourse, whenever we talk of social, then we actually try to figure it out as something which is only interpersonal. But stress is not something, or rather any health issues in general is not something which is a result of only the relation between one human being and another human being. Rather, it's a product, or rather, it's an outcome of a complex interrelationship between individual's relation with his biotic as well as abiotic components. So, this complexity of understanding the relationship, this holistic understanding of the relationship of an individual with his relationship with his social and cultural environment, which does not only comprise the individuals, that comprise abiotic components as well, it makes the entire enterprise a social enterprise. Because this initial clarification is particularly important in deciphering the etiology of the disease in population or in a particular cohort, because public health is a complex outcome of human activities or behaviors connected with the environment, which I've already said, both animate as well as inanimate. Now, public health work is achieved by promoting, as we all know, the healthy lifestyles, researching disease and injury prevention, detecting, preventing, and responding to infectious disease, and so on. Now, temperature, pressure, humidity, environmental chemicals, virus, foods, water, air, natural resources, etc., and their complex interplay with body-mind. I'm repeating, their complex interplay with body-mind, mediated by human practices, conducts, behaviors shaped by norms, values, beliefs, accessibility governed by social, economic, political, and cultural structures, make the entire gamut a social enterprise, and not only the relation between two or more individuals. Because this initial clarification is very important in understanding any public health issue, particularly stress. Now, talking about social stress, there are three main categories of social stresses. Now, What are social stresses? Social stresses means any element or any uh, event which induces stress. Like in cancer, carcinogen means any substance or any chemicals or any agent which induces cancer. In a similar way, any element, any component of our social and cultural environment which induces stress in human beings, these are called stresses or particularly social stresses. Now, there are actually three main categories of social stresses that we have identified. Number one, these are life events. Life events, they're defined as abrupt, severe life changes that require an individual to adapt quickly. For example, any sexual assault, sudden injury, or death of a loved one, any financial thing, abrupt, anything which is abrupt, sudden. So these are life events. Number two is chronic stress. Chronic stress means which are defined as persistent events. That means which go on for a long time. Persistent events which require an individual to make adaptations over an extended period of time. For example, an unhappy marriage, divorce, unemployment for a long time. These are chronic strains that people experience in their life. And apart from these two, there are daily hassles, which are defined as minor events that occur, which require adaptation throughout the day. For example, bad traffic, disagreements, you go out of your house and you have an altercation with a person on the street, uh, a bad day at the office. These are daily hassles. But the thing is that we need to understand that whenever we talk of stress, there is always a tendency that stress is always dysfunctional. কারণ আমাদের একটা সবসময় ধারণা হয় স্ট্রেস মানেই যেন খারাপ। মানে চারিদিকেই তো সবসময় আমরা শুনি স্ট্রেস ম্যানেজমেন্ট কোর্স, আবার অনেকে বিজ্ঞাপন দেয় 5 মিনিটের স্ট্রেস থেকে মুক্তি পাওয়ার উপায়, এবং তাই নিয়ে অনেক বই আছে। কিন্তু এই ক্লারিফিকেশনটা দিয়ে দেওয়া প্রয়োজন যে সব স্ট্রেসই ডিসফাংশনাল নয়। বিকজ ওয়েন ইউ আর প্রিপেয়ারিং ইউর সেলফ for an examination, you experience stress, but that stress is functional for you. But that stress is functional for you because that stress will help you in your preparedness. That stress will help you in getting yourself prepared. For example, a cricketer approaching a big match, or a musician approaching a live concert, or a student going for an examination. These are all examples of stress which are functional because it helps him to get more prepared for that particular event. So not all stress are dysfunctional. Stress is dysfunctional uh, when one experiences emotional, behavior, and physiological changes that can put under greater risk for developing non-functionality. For example, if it approaches to, if it reaches a particular area or at a particular point where the person's everyday routine activity will get disrupted, or rather his relationship with his surroundings, or his so-called everyday relationship with his relationship with his environment, social environment gets disturbed, then there is definitely a need to address the issue. And when stress becomes chronic, one experiences emotional, behavior, and physiological changes that put them under a greater risk for developing a mental disorder and physical illness. Now, the discussion examines into cultural differences in people's experience of and response to stress. By culture, we mean the set of ideas, beliefs, expectations, and behaviors that are shared by a particular group of people. Where it comes to stress, An individual's culture could affect their experience in a number of ways. Number one, in what type of, while I'm saying this, the culture determines an individual's experience of stress. For example, the way these stresses are perceived and understood. Because there might be some stressor which is not at all relevant in a particular culture as something which will induce stress, unlike another culture which will identify another stressor altogether in identifying that particular stress. So there will be no common terminology, or rather there will be no common definition for a stressor for two different cultures. The two different cultures might place different importance or might place different emphasis on the relative importance of a particular stress on the people at large. So the way these stresses are perceived and understood, the extent of the physiological stress response produced, and the coping mechanisms available to deal with the stressor. Because the coping mechanisms also differ from one culture to another culture. Because your concept of well-being, because today's deliberation topic is culture, stress, and well-being. So not only the culture part, but also the well-being part. The definition of well-being is also different for different cultures. A highly individualistic and materialistic culture will have a different definition of well-being from a culture which is not so materialistic. So there would be a different definition of well-being, or rather, that is why there will be a different approach to our coping strategies that are being adapted by different cultures to get rid of the stress or to come out of the stress. So the coping mechanisms available to deal with the stressor, therefore the perception of well-being or the process of coming in terms with the reality, or in psychological term, we can say the process of negotiation with the social reality, is also culturally fashioned. Different cultural groups inhabit different geographical, economic, and political areas, because for this reason they are likely to be exposed to different types of stressful events. For example, I can give you an example here. In UK and in other countries, we tend to define stress in terms of workplace job overload, the social environment, for example, family relationships, and economic factors like debt, and other measures of life stress, for example, divorce, change of job, change of financial circumstances, so on and so forth. But in other cultural contexts, different stresses are likely to be experienced. That what I was talking about just a few minutes back, that different cultures have different definitions of stresses, or different definitions of events which are termed as stresses. For example, in some parts of the world, natural disasters, for example, earthquakes, floods, tornadoes, are more common, making the exposure to extreme stresses more likely, which is unlike in any other part of the world, for example, in USA and UK. But other parts of the world may be affected by war or famine that may make daily survival very difficult and render the types of concerns that predominate in UK largely irrelevant. When I'm saying largely irrelevant, that means these stressors are not totally absent from other cultures, but their presence is comparatively less as compared to other cultures. Therefore, the relative importance or the relative importance or the importance attached to those events as stresses is comparatively low as compared to other cultures. Uh, Different sources of stress are experienced by members of a minority culture living within a majority culture. For example, we can talk of immigrant refugees who are affected by a range of stresses, some of which are shared with members of the majority culture. For example, poverty, poor housing, and some of which are such as discrimination in the workplace and threat of racist abuse and physical attack. So these are some major stresses for the people who are coming from a particular culture to another culture from, and therefore becoming a part of the minority culture where they are coming. Uh, Now, just a few minutes back, I have said about the perception of stresses. Now, the perception of stresses also vary considerably from one culture to another culture. That is why it is said that culture differs according to what their members perceive as stressful. Because the perception of stress is also, which is culturally tailored. For example, in parts of Southeast Asia, such as Korea or Japan, academic success is given higher importance than it is in the UK. This is reflected in the degree of educational stress suffered by Southeast Asian students. In Japan, for example, there are regular reports of students committing suicide because they have not passed an exam. But you can ask that this also happens in India. But what I'm saying is that in a particular cohort, the frequency with which that particular event happens, it gives an indication about the relative importance that a particular culture gives to a particular event. And thereby, it becomes a major stressor in that particular culture. So, in Japan, I've already said, whilst these occurrences are not so much heard of in UK, the relative absence compared to Japan suggests that the cultural differences in beliefs, I'm repeating, the cultural differences in beliefs led to the differences in experience of exams. Because the experiences of exams or examination is also different for different cultures. Cultural norms can influence whether an event is seen as stressful or not. And this is very important. For example, in a largely monogamous culture, the discovery that one significant other has taken another partner is generally perceived as highly stressful. However, in some African cultures where polygamy is the norm, the taking of another partner might be welcomed. Here I would like to give you an example of a study made by Schwartz, who conducted a study where black and white South Africans indicate that the types of events experienced as stressful for people with a European cultural background are different to those experienced as stressful by black South Africans, whose cultural beliefs, understandings, and expectations are different. Buisen, another thinker, has conducted research into some of the differences between white and black South Africans that affect their responses to workplace stresses. She found that black participants were significantly more tolerant of the uncertainty than the white because of their particular socioeconomic and historical background. This was related to the African cultural belief of not having control over the future because they are quite prepared for the uncertainty that will be coming their way, which contrasts with the European cultural outlook. Because of this difference, the black South Africans were less prone to work stress than white South Africans, who were more likely to become anxious when confronted by unstructured situations or unpredictable circumstances. Recently, some evidence has emerged that people from some cultures produce stronger stress response than others. This is very significant in stress literature or stress discourse. This difference does not seem to relate to genetic difference between the culture, which there must be some genetic factors involved, but the relative importance of the genetic factor is low as compared to the culturally preferred child rearing practices. So, this is more to do with the cultural practices related to child rearing. For example, Commons and Miller carried out a large-scale study that compared American parents with a number of other cultures. They are comparing American parents, their child rearing practices, with the child rearing practices of other cultures. For example, the Gusii people of Kenya. The Gusii people of Kenya. They looked at the variety of measures, including parental behavior, attachment, emotional learning, and brain functioning. They found significant differences between the American and the Gusii parents, including, let me give you details about how the child rearing practices also differs from one culture to another culture. For example, American infants and children are expected to sleep in a separate room, whereas Gusii children sleep in parental bed. American parents emphasize verbal interaction with children, whereas Gusii parents emphasize physical contact. American parents are much more tolerant of crying and leave their infants to cry much longer than the goosey parents before attempting to console them. American parents stimulate their children for a longer period of time, for example, through extended play, than the goosey parents, who prefer short bursts of interaction, which stop when the child becomes too excited. So, according to Commons and Miller, because Commons and Miller, from these observations, these interrelated observations, came to the conclusion that the American approach to child rearing is related to the goal of promoting independence. American parents typically voice the concern that, for example, unless the child learns to sleep on its own, where independence and self-reliance are favored. However, there is a possibility that the early experiences of American children have an effect on their physiological stress responses in later life. Because of their parental behaviors, American children spend long periods in states of high arousal from a very early age. Of particular concern to Commons and Miller is also the observation that they may be left to cry for longer periods of time and receive relatively little physical contact compared with the goosey children. In a similar vein, Siegel and Shore conducted a longitudinal study in which children were followed for 17 years at a stretch. It's a longitudinal study. Those who showed the highest level of stress during the parental separation in early childhood were most vulnerable to psychological problems, including stress-related ones in later life. Similar results have been found when subcultures within a particular society have been investigated. For example, it has been found that the African Americans produce more extreme stress response than European Americans to a range of stresses, including injury or illness, change in work responsibilities, and changing living conditions. Now, similarly, hypertension is twice as common in African Americans as in Europeans. One possible interpretation of this data is that the minority groups who are exposed to poor living conditions and social discrimination very early in life develop the increase in the intensity of the stress response later in life. Now, all of this research suggests that early experience of members of different cultures may affect the way they respond to stress throughout their lives or stress in the latter part of their life. So that preparatory phase they have already come across those preparatory phase where because of their socio-historical and economic background, they have to undergo high level of uncertainty and stress in the early life, which has a profound impact on their management of stress in the latter period of life. So, whenever we are trying to connect stress with the socio-historical background or the origin of a particular community, we are attempting to anthropologize stress. That means we are trying to move away from psychology to take the cultural and socio-historical context of stress into account. Now, anthropologists and cultural scientists have long debated the role of various cultural institutions and rituals in inducing and managing stress. Historically, psychology in general and stress and coping research in particular suffer from a dangerous flaw which relates its inability to be responsive to cultural diversity, because most of the concepts in psychology of stress and coping have emerged from and grown out of the research in Western societies, but they have not taken into account the nuances of non-Western societies as well. So that is a lacuna in its particular lacuna for a particular discipline, a particular discourse like stress and coping. Long ago, personality anthropologists taught us that every culture has a unique personality type. Following Raymond Cattell, we argue that every culture has a unique psychological makeup to adjust to the environment. No value judgment is possible in personality and anthropology. This will also mean that every culture has a unique way to cope up with stress, and particular stress coping strategy endemic to a particular culture is good in that culture only. Because ফর এক্সাম্পল যদি ধরুন আমরা বলি যে মানুষকে সবসময় বিশ্বাস করা উচিত, যদি এটাকে আমি একটা ইউনিভার্সালিস্টিক ভ্যালু হিসেবে ধরার চেষ্টা করি, অবিশ্বাস করা উচিত না। কিন্তু যে কালচারে which is ridden with conflict, which is ridden with ridden with threat of physical injury, সেখানে সেই কালচারের বাবা মা তার সন্তানকে এটা শেখাবে যে চট করে কিন্তু কেউ তোমাকে ডেকে নিয়ে গেলেই তুমি সঙ্গে সঙ্গে তার সঙ্গে চলে যাবে না। যেই জন্য দেখবেন আমাদেরও বড় হওয়ার সঙ্গে সঙ্গে কোট আনকোট ছেলে ধরার কনসেপ্টটা আসে। কেউ অচেনা লোক থাকলে সেই যদি চকলেট দিতে চায় তুমি কিন্তু নেবে না। কিন্তু একদিক থেকে দেখতে গেলে আমি তো তার মধ্যে একটা অবিশ্বাস ঢোকাচ্ছি যে যে কেউ তোমাকে কিছু দিতে গেলেই সঙ্গে সঙ্গে চলে যাবে না তার সঙ্গে, বা সেটাকে তুমি হাত বাড়াবে না বা কিছু করবে না। তার মানে আমি তো তাকে একদিক থেকে সবাইকেই সমানভাবে বাবা মাকে যতটা বিশ্বাস করো বা পরিজনকে যতটা বিশ্বাস করো, বা রাদার এখন তো আবার চাইল্ড সেক্সুয়াল অ্যাবিউজের ক্ষেত্রে এখন পরিজনদের ক্ষেত্রেও বলা হচ্ছে যে গুড টাচ ব্যাড টাচের যে কনসেপ্ট এসে গেছে। তো সেখান থেকে তো এখন সত্যি তো এখন সব কোলে নেওয়া বাচ্চাকে, সব বাচ্চাকে আদর করা, সবগুলোকেই সমানভাবে দেখা হচ্ছে না। এখন বাচ্চাদেরও শিখিয়ে দেওয়া হচ্ছে যে গুড টাচ বলতে কি বোঝানো হয়, ব্যাড টাচ বলতে কি বোঝানো হয়, সবাইকে বিশ্বাস করার সমস্যা কোথায় সেগুলোকে বাচ্চাকে বোঝানো হচ্ছে। সেই জন্য that's why I have said that no value judgment is possible in personality anthropology, because every culture has its unique way of coping with a particular stress, and that coping strategy is good for that particular culture. Why I'd not say good, I'd say useful for that particular culture, because as I've already said, for example, it is a strategic adaptation in a vulnerable environment ridden with conflict. কারণ যে এনভায়রনমেন্টটা বিশ্বাসযোগ্য নয় এবং যেখানে এই ধরনের ঘটনা ঘটে সেখানে কিন্তু বাচ্চাকে অবিশ্বাসটা একটা স্ট্র্যাটেজিক অ্যাডাপ্টেশন মেথড হিসেবেই তার মধ্যে ইনডিউস করানো হয়। সেই জন্য ইউনিভার্সালিস্টিক ভ্যালু বলে সত্যি কিছু হয় কিনা সেটা কিন্তু এখন প্রশ্নের মুখে, কারণ it will depend upon the local condition, local context within which a particular person is in. So in this context, the best thing that we can do to reform stress and coping research is by asking what are the various types of stress inducing elements in a particular culture. যখন এই প্রশ্নটা করা হবে যে what are the various types of stress inducing elements in a particular culture, we will get a clear picture, or rather we will get a picture of the major stressors in a particular culture, and therefore the coping strategies or the coping management strategies will differ for different cultures. It will not be the same for a particular culture. সেই জন্য কোনো কাউন্সিলিং এর ক্ষেত্রে হ্যাঁ বলুন কি হয়েছে বলে কিছুক্ষণের জন্য বসে সঙ্গে সঙ্গে একটা প্রেসক্রিপশন লিখে দেওয়া, this is not something which will work for long, because you have to understand the socio-cultural context of that particular person, the belief system. সেইভাবে যদি কাউন্সিলিং গুলো করা যেতে পারে, যেগুলোকে বলা হয় multicultural counseling, because unless a proper understanding of the cultural background of the client is not considered, multicultural counseling is bound to fail or will become an uphill task. Better understanding of the parties involved is possible when a multicultural perspective of stress is taken into consideration. A counselor has to take the other people's world views into consideration while talking with them. এবং কোপিং স্ট্র্যাটেজিজ এর ক্ষেত্রেও আমি কোনটাকে কোপিং বলে মনে করি, আমি কোনটাকে ওয়েলবিং বলে মনে করি, সেই ওয়েলবিং এর প্রেসক্রিপশনটাকে তাদের মাথার উপর চাপিয়ে দেওয়াটাও কিন্তু শুধুমাত্র ভুল তাই নয়, এটা এক ধরনের বায়াস। এবং আমি মনে করছি আমার কালচারে এটা হচ্ছে একটা বেস্ট কোপিং স্ট্র্যাটেজি। আমি বলে আরেকজন কালচারের ওপরে সেটাকে যদি তার সঙ্গে যদি আমি সেটাও তার উপর চাপিয়ে দিই, তাহলে কিন্তু এটা এক ধরনের পক্ষপাত দুষ্ট কাউন্সিলিং টেকনিক বা পক্ষপাত দুষ্ট কাউন্সিলিং স্ট্র্যাটেজি হয়ে দাঁড়ায়। তার মানে কি এই যে কোন ইউনিভার্সাল স্ট্রেসার বলে কিছু হতেই পারে না? কিছু কিছু তো হতেই পারে, যেমন ফর এক্সাম্পল পভার্টি, ড্রাউট, কনফ্লিক্ট, ডিসক্রিমিনেশন। এইগুলো কোনো সমাজে নেই হতে পারে না, সব জায়গাতেই রয়েছে। But much of the stress in an individual's life is induced by practices unique to each culture. যেটা আমার বক্তব্য। From toilet training to life cycle rituals, from residential change to polygynous households, belief in malevolent gods, competition, and discontinuities between childhood socialization and adult roles. Now, on this point, psychoanalysts will argue that culture is an institutionalized system for releasing stress, or culture is a symbol of conflicts residing deep in the unconscious of the human beings. For instance, totems or taboos are emotional reactions to death or other painful experiences of life. There are functionalist anthropologists also who argue that culture is in itself an instrumental reality for coping with stressful events, like scientists at ISRO doing puja before a rocket launch in order to get rid of stress and anxiety for successful launch. Cultural systems are potentially able to provide critical resources and to buffer individuals from environmental stressors. However, they are not always effective at buffering stress and may produce new threats also. When stresses cross the buffering ability of the cultural systems, then a biological response becomes inevitable. Finally, the biological response is not adequate, then population's ability to survive may be challenged. Now, some varieties of stress may in fact arise when an individual encounters an alien culture. Alien culture, for example, anthropologists define it as cultural shock. Cultural shock means a variety of stress that occurs in individuals suddenly landed in a foreign culture. It results from losing all familiar signs and symbols of social intercourse. So our entire social world is subjectively construed, and all our actions and motivations find their meaning in medium of culture. Therefore, most part of stress and anxieties in our life are in response to our inability to act in accordance with our quote-unquote social expectations, norms, values, which are specific to a particular culture. That's why stress is so cultural and stress is so social. I have started with this introductory prologue, that why stress is social. So this is why stress is so social, it's so cultural. Ethnicity and culture plays a significant role, as I've already said, in the perception and the use of family support and coping behaviors. The breakthrough in understanding the relationship between stress and culture goes to Margaret Mead. Mead challenged Stanley Hall's conception that adolescence is the age of storm and stress. The problem with Hall's argument is its inability to universalize inability to be universally applicable across various cultures. Researchers show that stress and identity crisis during adolescence in Western culture is characteristics of capitalistic societies, where an individual's choice at adolescence in choosing his vocation may have significant costs for his future life. Mead found that North American societies put an extra pressure on adolescents, which are related to taking critically important decisions in life. For example, while discussing about the influence of culture on stress, it has been said that there is a clear distinction between Eastern and Western cultures on 4 core value systems or factors, which includes individualism versus collectivism, cognitivism versus emotionalism, free will versus determinism, materialism versus spiritualism. So based on these values or factors, stress is induced in different ways. Individualism and collectivism are examples of cultural constructs that can influence each component of stress and coping. In individualistic societies, many of the ongoing stressors may stem from pressure to be autonomous and independent. That I've already said about the American child rearing practices just a few minutes back. These stressors may be perceived by the individual during early adolescence, when individual is not ready to be autonomous so as to handle all responsibilities. But there is always a social pressure that you have to be autonomous, you have to be very self-reliant in making decisions. But in contrary, or rather contrary to this, in collectivistic societies, there is a greater pressure to be symbiotic and interdependent. Even if in that culture anybody tries to become or tries to do things on his own, there is always a pressure that you should consult with people around you while doing a particular thing, or you should not undertake any uh, step which would lead to your personal satisfaction should aim at the collective satisfaction. So, a sort of altruistic value is being imposed on such cultures, contrary to this. So, contrary to the American value system. So, these pressures could be in form of sharing your earning among one's family members, or the pressures could be in the form of dilemma to stick a balance between one's own needs and needs of the fellows. Also, based on some studies, it has been found that individualistic cultures have people with internal locus of control than do a collectivistic culture. So, the long debate classifying people on the type of locus of control may actually be cultural differences in attributing causes to the events. Now, cultural stress is a new type of stress that is superimposed on the normal stresses of everyday life. For example, we all know and we have all have been exposed to or we all have been encountered with the digital revolution, which started in 1980s to increase population and affluence, to world-changing events, to chronic economic concerns, to the consumption, to the compulsion to send an endless streams of text or to update our network of friends and family on Facebook and Twitter. So many of the life stressors have taken a more prominent and invasive position in our daily life. For example, looking at today's situation, we could see that uh, that there is a higher rate of unemployment and literacy rates among Black Americans as compared to white Americans, might have created a poverty-related stress, leading them to suffer from consequences of negative stress, like any other physical problems connected with this condition. So, uh, this is quite possible for different cultures which are drastically different from each other. Nearly 3.5 million Americans spend an hour and a half or more getting to and from work as they are pushed further away from work in search for more affordable housing. Those who are doing their work as commuters are filing 4 a.m. trains into major cities, and restaurants that open for breakfast at 6 a.m. are opening earlier to accommodate the bleary-eyed workforce. So technology is not to entirely blame for cultural stress, but the freedom to work and communicate anywhere, anytime, 24 hours a day, keeps work-oriented cultures or keep the cultures which are so much work-ridden, I would say. That, for example, America, which keeps America the land of constantly locked on workforce. They're constantly locked on. Americans work longer hours than nearly anyone in the developed world, even the Japanese. For many professionals, the 40-hour work week is history. 60 to 80-hour work weeks are now in the norm. As a result of this pursuit to stay ahead of time, people experience extreme level of on-the-job stress. Culture stress, whether caused by fear, overwork, or too many options causing conflict in decision making, ultimately leads to isolation. And I believe isolation to be one of the most prominent disease or rather epidemic in today's world. The studies have shown that to reduce isolation, people need to have regular physical and social contact, which reduces cultural stress and leads to happier and healthier lives. So, and this particular thing also, this cycle puts pressure on children to excel at a very young age also. Because while placing a burden on the parents to make more money to pay for the education and extracurricular activities, this scenario, coupled with our society's increasing affluence, has a far-reaching domino effect. In order to make more money to pay for all the activities we're involved in, we're all working for longer hours. The more money we make, the more things we buy, and this phenomenon extends well beyond possessions. As we have become more informed society, we are more aware of the endless possibilities available to us in the form of clubs, lifestyles, diets, leisure activities, to name just a few. All of this has put a great strain on our health and well-being. Uh, Now, coming on to the topic of how to deal or how to adjust with cultural stress. Uh, but before going to the management of cultural stress, we should also understand uh, the factors which enter into the amount of cultural stress one feels while living in another culture. For example, in a foreign culture, for example, the involvement, the values, the communication, the temperament, the entry re-entry points, the children who internalize the values of the host culture. These are all factors which play a predominant role in inducing stress in an alien culture. Whenever we are talking of cultural stress or cultural shock, and these cultural stresses induces feelings of anxiety, confusion, disorientation, uncertainty, insecurity, helplessness, lack of motivation, lack of joy, illness, lack of fulfillment, discouragement, feeling quote unquote out of it, irritability, contempt for the host culture, resentment, and ultimately rejection of the host culture. And another thing which is very crucial here is um, the point of homesickness, because I always feel that I should go back home because this is not my place. This is not my place. So this is another factor which are very crucial in cultural stress studies. Uh, but rather, I would not go into the details of what to do and what not to do, because there are in every stress literature there is do's and don'ts. Do these things to avoid stress. Yes, there is also certain things like acceptance, communication, regular physical activity, etc., etc. But as a student of sociology, I'd rather not go into any prescription, because that would be something which will be uh, very authoritarian in nature, because I am dictating what should be done, because it should be done uh, by talking with a particular person who belongs to a particular culture. So that's why I said about the multicultural counseling. His worldview, uh, his way of understanding the reality around him, and his strategies for negotiating with the realities around him. These are all these elements should be taken into account before giving him any recommendations or suggestions regarding management of the stress. But there can be a question that can cultural stress be prevented? The short and simple answer is no, because stress in general cannot be prevented. We all experience that in life. Trying to become at home in another culture is always a challenging venture for anybody. So, and it has a detrimental effect on not only of our on our physical and mental health. It has detrimental effect on the way we look also, because it has a detrimental effect on uh, rather on the surface of our body, on the skin, because dermatologists have long recognized neuropsychological connections between appearance of the skin, perception of beauty and health. Anxiety and cultural stressors trigger cellular water loss through perspiration. The skin may flare up with acne or eczema in stressful situations, and there are so this is also a part of the physical health. So these are also connected to cultural stress also. And another thing is that the gender roles, which are which play a very significant role, because throughout our lives people are taught explicitly, implicitly, or vicariously which behaviors are desirable for men and which behaviors are desirable for women in the society. Examples include experiencing that women usually take care of the children while men will work, encouragement to participate in gender typical activities, or injunctions. For example, for boys, don't cry, girls, don't swear. At latter age, are, are such expectations often translate in approval and disapproval of conduct. And moreover, there is a culture of silence and stress studies, which says that personal narratives and experience and the qualitative interviews and quantitative research raise readers' consciousness about the oppressive structures and cultures that impact women in myriad ways. It's the culture of silence that we as society must break, because it's the silence that enables men to continue with predatory behavior with vulnerable women. It is the culture of silence that makes it so difficult for women to speak up, and leading to post-traumatic stress disorder. And when a woman complains, it most often comes at a huge personal cost for him. So behavioral expectations are integrated by individuals into their identity and typically of gender traits. So research on the relationship between gender traits and health has shown that masculinity in particular is related to better physical and mental condition because of the controlling behavior. Masculinity is positively related to physical health and health behaviors. Overall, the effect of masculinity on physical health is positive, except for coronary heart disease, which and other diseases which are to a large extent male specific. Socialization, particularly through gender roles and gender traits, has been related to the stress process, the experience of stress, and to the health of the individuals. So now, coming to the concluding section about the coping mechanisms and well-being. As I've already told, that coping mechanisms also vary from one culture to another culture. They are, in individualistic culture, there might be some coping strategies which is primary. For example, cultures which are problem focused, externally oriented problem strategies. People from Western English speaking backgrounds are more likely to cope through externally targeted control strategies. For example, is a situation or a condition is creating problem to you or is disturbing you, rather than transforming your perception about that particular condition, what needs to be done is to change that particular condition which is existing outside of you in order to get relief from that particular condition. So this is a sort of primary externally oriented coping strategy, or rather problem solving strategy. But in collectivistic and spiritualistic culture, people will preferably adopt emotion focused, secondary and internally oriented coping strategies. For example, it has always been said in the different religious discourse that if you can control anything, control it, or if you cannot control anything, control your interpretation about that particular thing. If your subjective interpretation of that object changes, then you will be at peace with that particular thing, or you will be at a peaceful settlement with that particular thing, which has been creating problem for you for a long time. So these are different cultural approaches to come to terms with a particular stressful event. Because culture transmits belief system that may affect the way their members make sense of the stresses, consequently how well they're able to cope with them. And one such example is religious belief. People with a religious belief system may be able to draw on divine assistance to help them cope with the stressor that affect them. For example, I'm giving an example of a study given by Gillard and Patton, who investigated the responses of Fijian islanders to Hurricane Nigel in 1997. They found that the majority of the interviewees felt that the religious beliefs had been helpful in adjusting to the stress brought on by the disaster. Besides the subjective impression that religion assists coping, it has also been shown to have beneficial health effects. They reported that African Americans make frequent use of religious and spiritual beliefs to cope with stress and adversity. Different cultures also transmit different values and beliefs about the appropriate way to cope with stresses. For example, as we've already indicated, that US American culture emphasizes independence and self-reliance, which could have an impact on person's willingness to accept coping resources as a form of social support. Now, as already noted, that people in Indian subcontinent are more likely to focus on emotion-focused coping strategies. For example, apply an internal control to stressful events. There also have been semantic differentials in the terminology in East and West. The alternative terms used for stress in India are suffering, pain, and pressure, etc. In Sanskrit term, the closed term for stress is dukkha. But dukkha may not exactly resemble what we mean stress in the West. It's not actually the exact translation of stress. The Urdu term for the same is zehni dabaw. Suffering in Indian tradition has been an integral reality of the life. Sufferings are one of among four noble truths in Buddhist philosophies also. Among the followers of Buddhist tradition who have internalized the philosophy of four noble truths, there is a greater tendency toward internally targeted controls when coping with stressful circumstances in life. According to Buddhism, which holds the philosophy of Pratitya Sampada, that means theory of dependent origination, sufferings are the results of the desire, which results in the perpetuating cycle of bondage, and the path to freedom from suffering is found in the absence of desire. In Hinduism also, the theory of karma entails that causes of suffering is karma, and the theory of karma, which has now become quite a tagline in internet sources, the theory of karma. Karma explains that causes of bondage and therefore dukkha lies within the self. Therefore, philosophy like Mimamsa, which will emphasize meditation, devotion, bhakti, which all relate to the self. Therefore, the appraisal of and the response towards stressful circumstances is influenced by the religious beliefs of the people. In Islam, the answer is remarkably simple. We turn back to our Creator. God knows what is best for His creation. He has complete knowledge of the human psyche. He knows of the pain, the despair, the sadness. God is whom we are reaching for in the darkness. When we put God back on our agenda, the pain will subside. In the Holy Quran, chapter 13, verse 28, it has been said that, verily, in the remembrance of God do hearts find rest. It asks us to look beyond the need for self-gratification, further still beyond the need to acquire positions. So it always inculcates the value of altruism over petty egoism. So the life of this world is just a fleeting moment, sometimes overflowing with moments of great joy and happiness, but at other times filled with sadness, sorrow, and despair. So this is the nature of life, and this is all about the human condition. The Bible goes on to tell, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. The first step is to becoming free of anxiety, is to give your life to Jesus Christ. Once you have taken this step, the next is to practice fixing your thoughts on Christ and His promises. In the battlefield of our minds, we are to practice awareness of our thoughts and take them captive. So, religion being an important component of cultural system plays an important role in the individual's life. Kawa, Nazar, and Dar, they are three thinkers who found that religiosity can help reduce the depression among the students. Medical anthropologists argue that accessibility and affordability are important considerations in health and well-being of people in India, because medicinal practices in India does have to pay attention to the issues of cultural plurality, economic affordability, and accountable availability of medical services at the ground level. Now, diverse forms of healthcare practices in the form of various tribal, indigenous, localized health and healing practices should be given adequate consideration and representation in mental health care system. The health models rooted in culturally shared assumptions, ethical values, reasoning patterns, and sensibilities should be given due consideration. This is why the bottom-up approach is more required than the top-down. Therefore, it is very critical that the research on stress and coping in India focuses on the local and indigenous practices of coping and mental healing as well, in conjunction with the practices which are biomedically approved. Even localized forms of mental and spiritual healing practices and indigenous medical knowledge should be integrated in the formal curriculum of the medical courses, and this tendency is being seen in the national health policy, which is talking about the integration of the indigenous practices with the mainstream practices that is being carried out in the biomedical field. Yoga, an Indian method to reducing stress and anxieties and maintaining balance in life, is gaining worldwide recognition and resurgence. In India, the growing dependence on drugs have resulted into prompting health professionals to consider the role of yoga and meditation in curbing problem of mental health issues and other issues as well. For example, discussing the relationship between psychoanalysis and Indian healing practices, Sudhir Kakkar observes spiritual practices like meditation do have therapeutic value, since both psychoanalysis and spiritual healing view mind as the center that creates suffering and disturbance. And I should say here, the Kakkar's work, in fact, based on a thorough psychoanalytical and anthropological reflection on clinical experience in India, is on one side fully immersed in the local dimension of Indian culture, and on the other allows to highlight the more general relationship between culture and unconscious, according to parameters that tend to go beyond the positions that entail a priority of one term or the other. In his view, The unconscious does not come before the culture and vice versa, but unconscious is already in itself cultural. The position is similar to those that at different levels try to overcome the nature nurture dualism or innatist or environmentalist opposition. In all Hindu traditions, Hindu, Sufi, etc., the role of sacred is very important. These traditions offer a glimpse of social values as well as symbolic universe of the Indian society. In addition to the Western style biomedicine, we have the Ayurveda, Siddha, the Unani system. These systems employ different methods of healing. Therefore, these traditions should form the important context of studying process of stress and its management in India. A growing body of psychological evidence that people find comfort in times of threat by moving closer to certain aspects of their worldview. For example, conservatives become more conservative. For example, liberals become more liberal. Religious believers become more devout, etc. Uh, Now, coming to the concluding part of my deliberation, there is an important question that what will happen to the people who don't believe in God, who are atheists? Because it's well known that religious faith can help believers cope with stress and anxiety by providing them with a sense of meaning and control at times of uncertainty. But what will happen to the people who don't believe in God or in any supernatural forces? It now seems that a belief in science and rationalistic outlook might do the same for the non-religious as well. But another pertinent question, another very contemporary pertinent question arises that are atheists more likely to embrace science than religious people? That means, does all atheists have to be scientifically inclined in order to get rid of stress if they don't believe in God? Now, many belief systems can be more or less closely integrated with scientific knowledge. Some belief systems are openly critical of science and think it has far too much sway over our lives, while other belief systems are hugely concerned to learn about and respond to scientific knowledge. But this difference doesn't neatly map into whether you are religious or not. For example, I'm telling you, some Protestant traditions, for example, see rationality or scientific thinking as central to their religious lives. Meanwhile, a new generation of postmodern atheists highlights the limits of human knowledge and see scientific knowledge as hugely limited, problematic, even especially when it comes to existential and ethical questions. These atheists might be the view that a true knowledge is only found in artistic expressions. And while many atheists do like to think of themselves as pro science, science and technology itself can sometimes be the basis of religious thinking or beliefs, or something very much like it. I'm giving you an example. It might seem contradictory, but there is an example that, for example, the rise of the transhumanist movement, which centers on the belief that humans can and should transcend their current natural state and limitations through the use of technology, is an example of how technological innovation is driving the emergence of new movements that have much in common with religiosity, because religiosity is also targeting the same agenda that humans can and should transcend their current natural state. Even for those atheists who are skeptical of transhumanism also, the role of science isn't only about rationality. It can provide the philosophical, ethical, mythical, and aesthetic fulfillment that religious beliefs do for others. The science of the biological world, for example, is much more than a topic of intellectual curiosity for some atheists. It provides meaning and comfort in much the same way that belief in God can for the theist. Psychologists show that belief in science increases in the face of stress and existential anxiety, just as religious beliefs intensify for theists in this situation. But there are cross currents as well that I've already discussed. Therefore, coming to the conclusion, therefore, any kind of belief system help you structure your perception of reality. It allows one to think of the universe in a particular meaningful way. Now, cultures are about how we think the world works, the language, knowledge, beliefs, assumptions, and values that shape how we see the world and our place in it, gives meaning to our experience, and are passed between individuals, groups, and generations. The psychological literature suggests that Benefits to well-being flow from the social support, existential meaning, sense of purpose, and coherent belief system. People can find meaning in life at a variety of levels. Close to their personal levels, there are things like jobs, family, friends, interests, desires. Many people today find meaning in pursuit of personal goals. There is also the level of identity with a nation or ethnic group, with a particular community. So there are many ways in which culture showed its influence on the diversity of experience. Every culture has its own way of making sense of the highly subjective experience, that is understanding of one's mental health. Each has its opinion on whether mental illness is real or imagined, an illness of the mind or the body or both, or who is at the risk for it, what might cause it, and perhaps most importantly, the level of stigma surrounding it. So, mental illness can be more prevalent in certain cultures and communities, but this is also largely determined by whether that is particular disorder, which is rooted more in genetic or social factors. Based on these cultural influences and ideals, people decide how they are going to cope with mental illness in general and stress or social stress in particular. Thank you so much.
Uh, Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Sourav Madhur Dey, for your very valuable, informative presentations. From the above discussions, we come to know about various kinds of knowledge and informations. First of all, I am completely agree with Dr. Sourav Madhur Dey that the culture is variables, and on the basis of geographical locations and cultural variations, there are very much impact in our life. They play important role for, but the stress is variables because of their geographical different kinds of stress. And there are only important things comes to us that there is no place for the universal value, because value is also depend on the personal opinion and the individualistic idea and thought. He also discussed different kinds of religious perspectives and geographical on the basis of geographical locational informative knowledge. Uh, thank you, Dr. Sourav Madhur Dey.
Thank you so
And
much.
now we have some important announcement for our audience, that if you have any queries or questions for Dr. Sourav Madhur Dey, so please input your comments or questions in our comment box. And there are other important things is that our upcoming next episode number 6 on culture and personality will be held on 29th December. Uh, Here, our chief guest will be Professor Shashwati Vishwas from North Bengal University, and she will be deliver our lecture on patriarchy, caste, and the development of the self. Now, we have a questions from Koena Ghosh. Sir, can I read it for you?
Yeah, please, please.
Uh, Ms. Koena Ghosh, she wanted to know that in this digital world, we are bound to maintain a social life depending on social media. This modern culture of interactions often portray only show off and fake humanity. How to deal with this stress?
Uh, the answer lies in the question, because when you are saying that social media and our life are bound to the in showing off and showing off the fake humanity in the social media. So the thing is that the problem is not with the social media per se, but the problem is the way we approach social media, because social media is just a platform. It is a non-living entity. uh, the relative importance that we give social media into our life is what makes it a great problem for us. not only the fake humanity, but the fake news also. I would like to say that there are there are streams of fake news coming in and out. For example, just few days ago, regarding a death of a celebrity, uh, long before he died, there have been news that he has already died, and it has disturbed the celebrity's family as well. So it's up to you to verify the information. Number one. Number two, it's up to you to strike a balance between your personal life, your social life, and your digital life. Because today's social life has become so much digitized that it has become a digital life in itself. Because we hardly get the time or get the interest in asking the well-being of another person who is living in just adjacent to my home by just going to his home, though it is not possible in this lockdown phase or in this COVID situation. But anyway, we try to text them. We try to give good morning, good evening, good night messages in WhatsApp and social media. There are flows of all these messages going on. So it is up to you, and I should tell you that technology has also given you, if you want to use it or not. That option is always there for you. For example, in a WhatsApp group, if you are in a WhatsApp group, which from the dawn to the night sends you WhatsApp messages, when which you are feeling disturbed, you can mute your notification. You can mute your notification, or rather, you can leave that group. It's up to you. So that's why I'm saying how to use it and when to use it is up to you. So if it is feeling stressful for you, so first of all, from a very individual level, you can choose to keep yourself away from these inflows, number one. And number two, if it is creating a problem to your personal life or to your social life, then you can definitely take refuge of law, or you can take refuge of administration for that. But you have to decide, you are the best judge, that how much media is essential in your life, how much social media is essential in your life. If it is very much essential, then your conduct will be in a different way. And if you can strike a balance between your personal life and social life and the digital life, then you will conduct yourself in a totally different way. So it's all up to you. You have to take the decision, you have to take the call, and you have to take the responsibility.
Thank you, Dr. Sourav Madhur Dey. Sir, I have sir one question, sir.
Yeah, sure.
Actually, sir, on the basis of our previous questions, I think that our nanotechnology or quantum technology, especially, sir, artificial intelligence, replaces
Yes.
our natural thought and disturbing our lifestyle. So, is it very much responsible for spreading stress? Actually, sir, we have lots of job. Okay, sir.
But
Okay, sir.
But the thing is that this answer will be better be given in a few years from now, because artificial intelligence has not permeated into the every facets of our life like it will be going to happen after 10 years. After 10 years, there will be an artificial intelligence where you will command your car to drive in that particular lane, and that car will go in that direction. Then that question will be very pertinent. But the thing is that there will always be a need of human agency in creating these artificial intelligence, or in using this artificial intelligence also, because there will be some controlling mechanisms also. There will be some policies also to how much extent it has to be used or it should be used for helping human beings. Uh, that, as you have rightly pointed out, that this is going to be a social life of chaos. This is going to be a social life of technology. So the technology vis-a-vis human agency. So this conflict will always run, and this conflict has always run from the time immemorial, and it has already it been in the run, and it will also be in the future also. But there is all. But I don't think that human beings will be totally replaced by artificial intelligence. Rather, human beings will try to devise new ways that will make their lives simpler, that will make solutions readily available. And for example, if I quote your question, then you can ask me, sir, we are going for a chalk and talk deliberation in classrooms. For example, students are sitting in front of us and we are teaching them through a chalk and talk method. And now we are talking about digital classrooms. Now we are talking about PowerPoints. We are talking about online classrooms. So these are actually taking place in, these are actually replacing these physical classrooms. Yes, that is true. But at the same time, need for an intelligence is also important, because artificial intelligence can solve complex problems, but artificial intelligence cannot feel, cannot emote. This is only the forte of human beings, because you can be high on your intelligence quotient, but what about emotional quotient? Artificial intelligence cannot take that place. So you always require an human being behind an artificial intelligence, in the application of artificial intelligence. So in that way, human beings will always be there. So we are scared of this crisis, that what will happen to human beings. But human beings will always be there, because it is the human beings who will understand the need of artificial intelligence in solving different problems of the human society. So human beings will always be there as an agency behind the creation of, and in the dissemination of artificial intelligence in the social life.
Yes, you are right, sir. Sir, I have another one questions.
Yes,
Uh,
please.
yes. Sir, one thing is that since traditional period, religious values and practices have some importance for our daily lives. Basically, from the religious perspectives, we know that there is no universal value, but every religions have some universal value from their own angles. Uh, so, from these religious perspectives, like yoga, meditations, namas, uh, those parts are playing a vital role for stress management, and we believe not only just we, but all most of religious believers believes that these parts are playing important role for stress management. But my question is that is it rational or is it logical for our modern society? Namas, yoga, or meditations, is it play a vital role for stress management
Uh,
now?
that's a very good question, Kamaruzzaman. But I think I have tried to answer your question in the discussion itself. That I have said that whether it's logical or rational, that is not important. Whether it is useful or not useful, that is important. If it is working for you, then it's logical for you. If it is not working for me, it's not logical for me. So logical, rationality, these are not something which is very much objective in nature also, because the perception of rationality, the perception of logic is also subjectively constructed. Okay, what will, for example, if I go for any, for example, faith healing, if I go for to any guru for any faith healing, and I got a solution from him, and it has worked in my favor, shall I disbelieve him? The answer is no. I will continue it. And you have gone to that guru also, and you have not got anything from him. You will disbelieve him. So the question is not about the quote unquote logistics or the quote unquote rationality. The question is about the pragmatic aspect of these things. That is why it is being made a part of the ongoing national health curricula that the present government is trying to incorporate, because these traditional healers, for example, yoga, siddha, and other things, they have their roles to play. But I am not saying that these will replace the biomedicine. These will act as supplement. This can act as supplementary for those who believe in it. But I've also talked about the thing that those who are atheist, those who don't believe in God, That was my concluding part. Is it how they will manage the stress? Because they don't believe in God, they don't believe in a supernatural forces. For them also, the belief in science, the belief in rationality, the belief in logistics will help them to come out of their own way. But there are also people who don't believe in God per se, but they believe in science, technology, and the way they have been used. For example, there are many atheists. There can be many atheists who can do pranayam. Pranayam has nothing to do with believing in God or something, isn't it? If you are doing a pranayam, you have to be a believer. There is no injunction on you. But he can be an atheist and can do a pranayam if he has got some benefit out of it. So what I am trying to say is that today our life is not compartmentalized. It has different options open to us. We can choose different options from these myriad options or myriad alternatives. We can go for indigenous system of medicine, ISM. We can go for biomedicine. If I ask you for a particular illness, if you make a survey that how many people go for allopathic medicine and side by side homeopathic medicine, you will find that more than 80% of the people use both. But or Ayurveda. But if you go for any logical mainstream biomedical understanding of health, then allopathic medicine or the biomedicine is the only solution they have. But people are now in a position to choose options from different sources, because what they need is not logic, what they need is not rationality, what they need is usefulness, whether it works for my benefit or not. Because we are by tradition a collectivistic society. It is good, but we are individuals. We are all self-interested beings. If an allopathic doctor finds that a medicine which was not cured by applying biomedicine has become cured by applying something else, will he not go for that particular option? Or will he not suggest somebody to go for that particular option? He might not do that because his business will be in harm. But anyway, he will have a belief in it because it is working for him. So the question is the question of logical and non-logical, everything depends upon the practical use or the practical applicability or the practical usefulness of that particular thing in our life. That what I mean. Because in this plural society, where plurality of ideas are there, where plurality of beliefs are there are so many health belief models, There are so many health belief models in our society. And these health belief models are not compartmentalized. There are cross currents in these health belief models. So why there are cross currents? Because people are finding them very integrative, very useful for their own well-being. So they're using that. So this is not the question of rationality or logistics. This is the question of usefulness or non-usefulness. Or for example, if I believe in biomedicine, if I find that a particular allopathic medicine is not doing anything good for me, shall I continue it? Never. I will go for another option because I have that option. Or rather, I should try another option. I have the choice to try another option. So that is my point.
ঠিক স্যার, আপনি ঠিকই বলেছেন, যথার্থই বলেছেন যে এটা রেশনালিটির বিষয় নয়, এটা প্রয়োজনীয়তার বিষয়, প্রয়োজন অপ্রয়োজনীয়তার বিষয়। আর এই কারণেই আমরা অনেক সময় কুসংস্কারাচ্ছন্ন হয়ে পড়ি, অনেক ম্যাল প্র্যাকটিসিং বা অনেক কুসংস্কারাচ্ছন্ন অনেক আচার আচরণের সাথেও জড়িয়ে পড়ি এই ব্যবহারিক প্রয়োজনীয়তা অপ্রয়োজনীয়তার উপরেই ভিত্তি করে।
হ্যাঁ, তাই বলে কি আমি এটা বলবো যে সাপ কামড়ালে তুমি ডাক্তারের কাছে না গিয়ে তুমি ওঝার কাছে যাও? সেটা তো বলবো না, আমি সেই অতটাও যাচ্ছি না। কিন্তু আমি যেটা বলতে চাইছি তুমি বুঝতে পারছো, যে আমি বলছি যে অনেক অল্টারনেটিভ সিস্টেম আছে যেখানে আমাদের যাওয়ার জায়গা থাকতে পারে। সেই জন্য সবকিছুকে নন লজিক্যাল বলে দেখে দেওয়াটা, তাহলে সেটাও এক ধরনের আমার মনে হয় একটা পাওয়ার ডিসকোর্সের জায়গায় চলে যাবে। হ্যাঁ, সেটাও কিন্তু একটা ক্ষমতা।
অবশ্যই স্যার, যুক্তি দিয়ে সমস্ত কিছুর বিচার বিশ্লেষণ সব সময় আসে না, অনেক সময় প্রয়োজনীয়তা
এবং প্র্যাকটিক্যালিটি দিয়ে, সেই সময়টা কিন্তু এসে গেছে। সেই থিওরিটিক্যাল আলোচনার জায়গাটা কিন্তু এখন অতটা নেই যতটা না প্র্যাকটিক্যাল আলোচনার জায়গাটা চলে আসছে।
আমরা অনেকটা প্রস্তুতি দর্শক মন্ডলীর কাছে জানাচ্ছি যে আমরা প্রায় শেষের দিকে চলে এসেছি। আপনাদের কাছে আবার আমাদের তরফ থেকে একান্ত অনুরোধ থাকবে যে আমাদের পরবর্তী এপিসোড নাম্বার 6 সংস্কৃতি এবং ব্যক্তিত্ব সম্পর্কিত আলোচনা নিয়ে পরবর্তী প্রোগ্রাম আসছে আগামী 29শে নভেম্বর। বক্তৃতা রাখবেন অধ্যাপক শাশ্বতী বিশ্বাস, উত্তরবঙ্গ বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ের সমাজতত্ত্ব বিভাগের বিভাগীয় প্রধান। আপনারা অবশ্যই থাকবেন প্রতি রবিবার 11টার সময় আমাদের সাথে। এবং এই প্রসঙ্গে ডক্টর সৌরভ মধুর দেকে অসংখ্য ধন্যবাদ আমাদের সাথে থাকার জন্য। আপনাদেরকেও যারা অনেকক্ষণ ধরে আমাদের প্রোগ্রাম দেখছেন এবং আমাদের সাথে আছেন তাদেরকেও আমাদের তরফ থেকে আন্তরিক ধন্যবাদ। নমস্কার, শেষ করলাম।
থ্যাংক ইউ।